Alright, for today's critical thought, we're returning to the topic of your core gameplay loop. But for today, I want to focus on what happens when there's trouble with it. It got corrupted, perverted, or just simply lost in the shuffle, and is there a way to correct the course? And if you missed our previous talks, the core gameplay loop is essentially the base foundation of your game's design, system, and mechanics. This is essentially your mission statement. It is the major marketing point on your store page. It's what if you had to describe your game in 15 seconds or less to someone that you're going to bring up. And it's typically considered good game design that the earlier in your game's development that you figure out and lock down your core gameplay loop, the easier your development's going to be. And the reason is that every decision, system, and mechanic of your game should, or I should say must, stem from your core gameplay loop. And if it gets messed up or you completely ignore it, it can lead to games that feel stitched together, a confusing mess, or otherwise just not all that great to play. And for today, the examples I want to start with both come from the same publisher, as it seems that EA has failed to learn that adage, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Earlier this week, I looked at SimCity 2013 for our Games of Ill Repute piece. This would be the last hurrah of the SimCity franchise, and I think possibly of Maxis as well. An overwhelming disappointment for a lot of people. And while things have certainly improved for the game since its launch and the disasters there, which we talked about in the video, I want to discuss the big decision that kind of trickled down to affect all the game systems. Specifically, of course, the core gameplay loop. And that was, I'm not sure if this is EA or Maxis or a combination of the two's decision to focus on multiplayer play, and more specifically with the region mode. Without repeating things too much from the piece, the region mode in SimCity 2013 basically condenses a larger game space into multiple smaller ones, with each region essentially taking up a set area of land. So if, again, my screen was the game screen, you would have a city spot over here, and one over here. And the idea was that instead of building one city to suit your dreams, wishes, or nightmares, you would build 2, 3, 4, so on, with each city basically being codependent on the other ones. So one city, if it had extra water, it could ship it to the city up here and get money. Or another city could share its garbage truck service, or fire, and so on. And this would all culminate with completing a great work for that region, which would then go back around and help all the cities that built it. And originally in SimCity 2013, this was all meant to be multiplayer. And there were many, and I do mean many, interviews with EA and Maxis people regarding their decision to make the game forced online. And this was all about, we want the multiplayer to work. And then to get that multiplayer, we needed the region system. And what happened was that you can see how this one decision just trickled or just spread across all the game's design and hurt it as a whole. So the first one would be forced online play meant that people who didn't have fast internet connections were in trouble. But then if we go down further, the region focus meant that cities were smaller, which meant that you had less play or less room to play in. But then if we go down even further than that, by forcing these cities to be codependent on each other and the overall focus on macro versus micro, this also hurt the simulation model of SimCity 2013. You couldn't do things as deep compared to SimCity 4 or even what would happen with city skylines, because there would be no way to completely calculate all that on top of having the cities interact with each other. So what this ended up with was creating a very basic experience, which on the other hand, which you could see some elements of greatness there, with the idea of having specialized buildings to push your city in different directions, similar to SimCity societies, and of course the charm and just the overall personality of SimCity 2013. But again, the issue is, even though they eventually turn things around and say that you could play the game offline, by then the damage was done. And the lesson for today's critical thought is this: if there's a problem with your critical thought, be it a design issue with it itself or the rest of the game as a whole not working with it, you can't do simple fixes to repair it, or simply tweaking stats and numbers. And the other example, of course, is from Star Wars Battlefront 2, which I'm sure no one here has ever heard of that game before. But following the game's microtransaction just travesty and EA backpedaling after Disney got involved, one of the things they did as an emergency situation was turn off all microtransactions. I think this was done like the day or the night of the game's release. And I'm sure someone at EA or DICE thought that would fix the problem. But this is yet another great example of why gameplay loop issues aren't easily fixed. Because even though they turned off the microtransactions, all the systems that were built to be, to interact with it and require it were still in the game. You still had the star card and loot box driven systems. You had the in-game currency being very low to encourage microtransactions and ergo the star card system. And you had the fact that playing the game wasn't as rewarding because of it. So for like the first week, people complained that they weren't making any progress because the game was explicitly designed to have microtransactions, hence all the star cards and the in-game currency balancing. And so basically, I think the week after, EA was forced to raise those currency bonuses up. But even then, it still remains to be seen what's going to happen once EA turns microtransactions back on. Because I'm sure we all agree that, it's going to happen at some point. It's not a matter of if, but of when. But the point, once again, is that when your entire game is built on a specific system or a specific design, if you have to backpedal or change it, every aspect of your game is going to be impacted by it. With SimCity 2013, when EA and Maxis turned off the online-only requirement, they really should have spent some more time enhancing the region system or just making areas bigger. But again, that will have cost more time and money. But the point is, and for the second part of our talk today, is what happens when you have to do that. Because as I just said, if the core gameplay loop is busted, it's never a simple fix. A good analogy would be building a 3-story home and realizing that you have to completely redo the first floor. Because even though just the first floor is a problem, it's not just a simple fix. You have to tear down the third and second floor to then rebuild things back up. And for a lot of games, it's almost akin to building a second or, heaven forbid, a third or fourth game, depending upon how long the development has been. And we've seen a few examples of developers going that, what we like to call like the redemption play, for trying to bring their game back. In 2016, I believe, Skyshine's Bedlam went through an entire rebuild of its core game system, balancing, and difficulty, and was, I think, re-released as Skyshine's Bedlam the Redux Edition. There was also Brigador, which had some complaints regarding its control scheme and balance, which had a new edition released earlier in 2017, which we did a stream of, I think, that night or a few days after, and the game was greatly improved. And in both those situations, again, the developers didn't just tweak a few values and call it a day. In Bedlam's case, or Skyshine's Bedlam's case, they did a complete overhaul of their design. And with Brigador, I think it was called the Up Armored Edition, they completely redid their game's entire control scheme. And again, when we're talking about stuff like control and UI design upgrades, those are not simple fixes. And we could probably spend a critical thought or two on those specific topics as well. But the point is, whenever your core gameplay loop is in trouble, it's never going to turn out well. And it's why you want to try and avoid these issues and stop them before they get there. Like I said at the start, the earlier you settle and lock down your core gameplay loop and then don't touch it, essentially, it's going to make your game's development a lot easier. Because ancillary systems and mechanics, they can be tweaked, adjusted, or removed while your game's foundation remains intact. A good example of this, and one that a lot of developers should pay attention to, was Prison Architect. With Prison Architect, Introversion found what they want out of that game relatively early into its development, and then the months of early access and continued patches added in more supplemental and ancillary systems. But at the end of the day, the core element of Prison Architect, once it was locked down, did not change. And the beauty of that was, if there was a problem with a patch or a system not working or people having complaints about it, it was simple as just removing that one system, versus again having to tear everything down. More importantly, this also meant it was a lot easier to iterate on your game. If I know that patch 6 that I did last month was perfect, everyone enjoyed it, all the systems worked, and then we have a problem with patch 7, well, that means I only have to deal with one patch worth of content versus looking at the entirety of my game's code. We talked about this, earlier in 2016, or I'm sorry, I think it was either late 2016 or early 2017 with Clockwork Empires, which sadly never managed to establish its core gameplay loop. And you saw with that game's development, or for fans who are following like I did, that every month or two they were going backwards and redoing systems or taking stuff out and putting new stuff in. And again, when your core gameplay loop is not finalized and not set in stone, it can lead to those situations of you going 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, and having to constantly redo your work. Or in an extreme example, like we talked about earlier in today's video, having your entire game essentially needing to be redone and fixed up because of an issue. But with that said, we're going to wrap up today's critical thought here. So again, the lesson for today is get your core gameplay loop settled on and then don't touch it. Once you decide what your game is going to be and everyone is in agreement about it, that's what it's going to be, for good and for ill. And at the end of the day, it's better to have a game with a solid gameplay loop that may not be, super big and amazing, versus a game that's trying to do everything and failing at the same time. So, to wrap things up for today, for a question for you folks, can you think of games where the core gameplay loop just didn't work? And did the developer manage to fix it? Or did they have no choice but to leave it as is? And for any developers watching, do you have good examples of times when your core gameplay loop was called into jeopardy or called into question and you had to do something about it? Let me know in the comments below, but thank you so much for watching. If you're new, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Check back for daily discussions on design here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. And if you'd like to suggest a topic for a future piece, please let me know below. But otherwise, have a great holiday week, and I'll catch you all next time. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Check back around 10 Eastern for regular streaming. If you'd like to suggest games for me to cover or topics to talk about, let me know in the comments below. For a collection of my writings as well as weekly podcasts on design, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the Game Wisdom Patreon, you can find us on there on patreon.com/gwblaser. $1 will get you into our private Discord channel where we talk game topics and more. $5 will get you voting privileges for any major event, including the Saturday Night Grab Bag, Patreon-funded goals, and more. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you enjoy more videos here on the Game Wisdom YouTube channel.